All right. John 13 we're in this morning. And we are finally, properly out of the book of the signs. Kind of the last big sign of the 7 signs in the book of the signs was obviously Lazarus being raised from the tomb. And then you had this chapter in chapter 12, where it's kind of the transition chapter, if you like, from the book of the signs to the book of glory, where Jesus kind of announces that now his time really has come, his hour has come, and he kind of sets his face towards what's going to happen to him soon. But now, as we enter chapter 13, this is kind of what commentators really refer to as the book of glory. Some people call it the book of the great sign. This is kind of the second half of John, if you like. And one commentator, D.A. Carson, kind of describes this, the rest of the book of John, saying that this is Jesus' self-disclosure in his cross and exaltation. He's revealing more of who he is and what he's come to do by doing it, completing the work he's been given, and displaying his glory in that work. And it begins with the upper room discourse. Chapters 13 to 17 are referred to as the upper room discourse. Sometimes they're referred to as the farewell discourse. It's basically John's version of the Last Supper, much longer than the account that's given in the Synoptic Gospels. It's more of there's much more back and forth, if you like, interaction between Jesus and his disciples, and it's his last great teaching before he goes to the cross. It's a very theological discourse that he has on the eve of his betrayal and crucifixion. There's a lot about the Trinity in there. There's a lot about Jesus' relationship to the Father. We're going to get into over the next few weeks. It's going to be great, meaty theological stuff. A lot about the sending of the Holy Spirit and the role of the Spirit in the church as Jesus ascends and gives to his followers the Paraclete, the Helper, that will lead them into all truth. And then the discourse ends with the great high priestly prayer, chapter 17, which is one of the absolute high points of the New Testament. It's one of the best chapters in the New Testament. I don't know who's going to teach that, me or Gary, but I'm kind of secretly hoping that, we'll split it. It's so long, there's so much in there that we might split that, but that's something to look forward to. But before Jesus kind of gets really speaking to his disciples in this kind of quote-unquote upper room discourse, there's kind of a little narrative prologue to that, which is Jesus washing his disciples' feet. It's a very famous story. I'm sure you're all fairly familiar with it. But let's read it together, and we can talk about it this morning. John chapter 13, beginning at the first verse. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" Jesus answered him, "What I am doing you do not understand now, but afterwards you will understand." Peter said to him, "You shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "The one who has bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you." For he knew who was to betray him. That is why he said, "Not all of you are clean." So we'll stop there for now. So John tells us that this is all taking place before the feast of the Passover. And let me tell you, I spent many hours, it felt like this week, reading. There's a lot of discussion amongst commentators about when this was taking place, because the Synoptic Gospels make it very clear that the meal that Jesus was having was the Passover meal, which was taking place on a Thursday this particular year, Thursday evening. But John here says now before the feast of the Passover, and then a couple of other things he says potentially might make it sound like what he's talking about is Wednesday evening before the day of the Passover begins the following day. So commentators have gone back and forth about this, talked about it forever, and they think a kind of more recent interpretation is, as opposed to a more traditional interpretation, is that John has kind of shifted the events backwards a day to Wednesday night to try and make a theological point that Jesus' crucifixion would have happened at the time when the Passover lambs were slaughtered. The Passover happens on the Wednesday night, and then on the Thursday, when the priests are sacrificing the Passover lambs, that's when Jesus would have been crucified. So you have that kind of theological connection. But I think most kind of more conservative and more orthodox, you could say, scholars take the traditional line, and that's the line that I would take this morning, that actually it's not that hard to reconcile with the synoptics. The events that they're describing happen on the same day. It's the Thursday evening, and when John says before the feast of the Passover, he literally just means kind of before they engage in the feast, before the meal gets going. That's St. Augustine's interpretation. That's most theologians throughout the history of the church have had no problem kind of reconciling the timeline of when this takes place. So this is the Passover meal. That's the kind of point that you get as you read the account. There's a link between what's going on here and the Passover, the great feast of the Jewish calendar year. That's kind of one of John's big things, is that Jesus fulfills all these festivals and all these Old Testament typologies, types of Christ. And we're clearly meant to see the link between what Jesus is doing in his serving and his going to the cross and the Passover. But he says he knows his hour has come to depart out of the world and go to the Father. Again, a huge theme in John, and we're going to see this multiple times, even this morning, but then later on throughout this discourse, John wants us to know that Jesus knew this was going to happen. He wasn't blindsided. He wasn't kind of caught off guard. He wasn't betrayed in a way that he didn't see coming. He knows this is coming. He's in complete control. He has foreknowledge of what's about to take place, and he goes willingly. He is in control. And he doesn't just know that what's about to happen. He's loved those that are in the world, and he loves them to the end, we're told. Now, if you think about Jesus' life, it's the entirety of his life is motivated by a love for those he came to seek and save, the lost, right? From his entire incarnation is one of humility done out of love for those that he's come to save. But then his entire ministry on earth is motivated by compassion. He's always acting out of love, isn't he? Healing people, raising people from the dead, acting out of a desire to meet people's needs, if you like. So you could read that as he's always been loving his people, and he loves them up until kind of the last day, up until his death. You can kind of read it temporally, or you can read it as he loves them to the uttermost, the utmost. The extent of his love is the greatest that it could possibly be. And you see that when Jesus says, later on he says, greater love has no man than this, that he laid down his life. So you kind of read it both ways. He loves from beginning to end, and he loves to the highest degree possible. That's the way you can read that phrase, he loved them to the end. And then we kind of have this little snippet there that John brings out in a couple of places that during the supper the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot to betray Jesus. And here is an interesting kind of snippet, but we want to avoid the temptation to feel sorry for Judas too much here. It's not as if the devil puts it into his heart in a sense that he controls Judas's actions. Judas is still fully responsible for what he does. If you think back to the Garden of Eden, like Eve is tempted by the serpent, and Adam obviously as well, but they're still responsible for their sin. Okay, they can't blame the serpent. They can't say, no, actually this was the devil. Same with Judas here. The devil puts it in his heart. But it was still his responsibility to refuse that temptation, but he doesn't. He gives in to that temptation, succumbs to it, and becomes the betrayer. And we'll speak more about that this morning later on. And then we have the infamous foot washing. And this foot washing comes out of those first few things that we've heard. It's the washing that takes place because Jesus knows who he is and where he's come from. And he has loved his people to the end. He now gives them this kind of display of the depth and the extent of his love for them. Oops, sorry. Trying to make sure it all just collapses there. He's going to, if you like, acknowledge that the Father has given all things into his hand. He's come from God and he's going to God. He knows that, and that's why he can serve in this way. It's an act of love and service, this kind of foot washing, but then ultimately pointing to the cross that he's about to go to, that he's laying down his life and laying down his position of power that he has. He's not grasping at it, not clinging onto it, but is able to lay it aside so that he can serve his disciples in this way. He's a living embodiment, if you like, of Psalm 118, verse 6, which reads, "The Lord is on my side, I will not fear. What can man do to me?" He's not afraid to serve in an undignified way. He's not afraid to lay down his life because he knows the Father has given him all things. He knows he's come from God and he's returning to God. And that is kind of a liberating truth, like if you like, for Jesus' ministry. And it's a challenge to us as well. If we know what we have been given and where we are going in the same way, then we should also have that kind of boldness, that lack of fear to serve to the utmost those that we have been placed in the midst of, and ultimately to give up our lives for God and for Christ and the extension of his kingdom. So yeah, more about the specifics of the foot washing now as you get into verse 4. Jesus gets up and he takes off his outer garments, doesn't he? It mentions, and ties a little towel around his waist. He says he laid aside his garments. And I think there's a significance there if we just stop and pause on the kind of description of how he does that. It's just a little line, but that line contains a fair amount in it. Firstly, it's kind of it's a very small amount of information, but it very kind of succinctly pulls you into the scene. You can picture it. You know exactly what's going on there. You kind of imagine yourself in the room. Jesus is taking off his outer garments, wrapping this towel around him. He's kneeling down to wash his disciples' feet. It's an act of humiliation, if you like. It's the lowest form of service in that kind of culture. What Jesus is doing, you can imagine it's kind of an awkward situation. His disciples are like, "Oh my word, what's going on?" They don't completely understand. But it actually has a theological significance as well. If you think about the laying aside of... Oh my word, there we go, it happened. I knew it would at some point. If you think about the laying aside of clothes, the word to lay aside, nearly every other time it's used in John's Gospel refers to Jesus laying down his life. It's almost as if there's like a kind of a reference is being made here. Like he has no desire to hold on to his dignity, if you like. He will lay aside his outer garments. He will lay down his life. He will go to the utmost to serve and to love his people. But also, this idea of laying aside clothes occurs in a few other places in Scripture. But most significantly, I think, it happens in Leviticus, chapter 16, on the Day of Atonement. The priest, there's a whole constellation of ideas that kind of are linked here. There's the garments and the washing. These things happen together in the Day of Atonement when the priest is about to go into the tabernacle to do what he has to do, the sacrifices and sprinkle the blood onto the mercy seat and all that, he has to wash himself, and then he has to put on holy garments. Whereas where you see here with Jesus is an exact reverse of that. As the true and great high priest, he takes off his garments in order to wash others, because he doesn't have to wash himself. He's about to go and do the ultimate act of atonement and service for his people, but he doesn't need cleansing himself. He cleanses others. And he takes off his garment as a sort of sign that he is, if you like, laying down his right to be treated better than how he's about to be treated. He doesn't have to sacrifice himself for any of his sins. He's giving up, if you like, he's laying aside the dignity that he deserves as the Son of God and all the benefits that come with that position, if you like. But there's a double reference here, because when the priest goes into the tabernacle, he was wearing these holy garments, he's washed himself, he's put them on, but then when he goes into the Holy of Holies, he takes them back off again and lays them aside. So the priest would go in wearing just, he would take off his outer linen clothes and go into the Holy of Holies. So there's like a double reference there. Jesus has taken off his outer garments and laid them aside, just as he is our high priest, about to enact this atonement for his people. And it's the same word that's used, or same concept that's used when in John 20 in the resurrection, to tie it into Easter today, that you see in the resurrection that is the linen cloths are left. They're laid aside, if you like. When Jesus exits the tomb, the linen cloths are laid aside, just like the priests would have been in the temple. It's kind of John saying, hey, look, guys, he's fulfilled the Day of Atonement. But also here we have just like an echo of it, a little foreshadowing, if you like. He lays aside his outer clothes, as he will do when he completes atonement for his people. So he's fulfilling a priestly role here, you could say, as he washes his disciples' feet. And he begins to wash. He gets down, if you picture it, he gets down on his knees. He's washing these people's feet. It's just like the anointing at Bethany we looked at a few weeks ago. It's intimate. It's awkward, potentially. He's wiping their feet, cleaning the dirt off. And Peter kind of protests, doesn't he? He potentially is kind of voicing what everyone's thinking. You can almost imagine it's kind of awkwardly silent, and he like gets to Peter, and he's like, no, you just won't have any of it. Presumably he thinks that Jesus is not, this is not dignified for Jesus to do, this is not something that's appropriate, doesn't think it's fitting, but Jesus says to him that, don't worry, like you will understand at some point in the future, you will understand what I'm doing. But that doesn't stop Peter. He just doubles down, doesn't he? Doubles down on it and says, no, you'll never wash my feet, which gives Jesus the opportunity to kind of explain a little bit more of what's going on. He says, if I don't wash you, you don't have any share in me. So we kind of, okay, so this is more than just a foot washing. There's more going on here, isn't it, than just a simple washing of feet. He's talking about the cleansing of regeneration. This little bit of washing is symbolic of the larger washing that we all need as sinners that are in need of cleansing from our sin. Because in the Bible there's lots and lots of pictures of what sin is, isn't there? Lots of metaphors that are used. Sin is debt. It's kind of a legal transgression. John speaks of it as blindness. You can see it as sickness in the Gospels and other places as well. But here we see it as uncleanness, dirtiness. Sin is dirty, and we all need to be cleaned. Don't we think of Psalm 51, just one reference, could go to lots of places in the Old Testament, but Psalm 51, David's psalm of repentance, he says, wash me from my sin, and I will be white as snow. And we can all relate to that, can't we? We could probably all have the kind of memories that we'd rather didn't have, where we think we've sinned and you feel dirty. You feel like, yeah, I've done something wrong. this doesn't feel good. I feel kind of icky. That's a modern word that people use, but I think it kind of sums up sometimes how sin can feel. I've done something wrong and it's not right. And then you have this, the cleansing. And that we can associate with that very easily as well. We've all experienced what it is like to clean something, right? Something that's caked in mud, that's really dirty. There's a very satisfying feel, especially if like that mud is like dried on, to like just clean it off, and the thing that you have, that you hold in your hands, is like it was new again. That's a very easy kind of picture to identify with. That's what we need. Forgiveness is like that satisfying wash, isn't it? The sloughing off of dirt and filth. And that's what Jesus is referring to. That's what these people need. So then Peter kind of cottons on and he does an about turn. He's like, okay, well, in that case, wash all of me. From the head to the toes. Do it all. To which Jesus replies, no, you are clean. Those who are clean, they just need their feet washed. And this doesn't mean, it's not like there's an addition. It's not like, okay, you're regenerated, but like there's an extra little bit that needs to be tweaked, or there's an additional washing that needs to be done. But rather he's kind of saying, okay, no, you are regenerated, you are clean, you have been cleansed from sin. But what's important now is the lesson and the symbolism of this act of service that Jesus is doing for them. Unless you partake in this kind of the lesson of service that I'm teaching you here, then you're not part of what I'm about to do. But then he does say, but not all of you. There is one of you who's not clean, in verses 10 to 11. And John wants us to know, again, Jesus knows what's about to happen. He knows what's about to happen. He's not blindsided. He's aware of what's going on, and he knows who it is that's going to betray him. So let's see more of that now in the next little section. Sorry, I lost my place when the Bible fell off the thing. Let's read from verse 12 down to the end of verse 20. When he'd washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for so I am. If then I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. I am not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but the scripture will be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I am telling you this now, before it takes place, that when it does take place, you may believe that I am he. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever receives the one I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me. So here Jesus kind of explains a little bit more of the significance of what he'd just been doing with the foot washing. What was it for? And he explains it to the disciples, and therefore kind of by implication to us. So what is the significance of this for us? And he kind of begins by saying, look, you call me Lord and teacher, and that's right, I am those things, but those things are not titles that come only with benefits. They also come with the point that this leadership is one of service. It's a servant leadership that Jesus kind of exhibits here, which is to be our attitude, isn't it? In verse 15 to 16, kind of the key verses in this little bit. You know, if I have done this, then you as my followers need to also do this, is kind of the plain teaching of what Jesus is saying. Jesus is our pattern, if you like, of service. He's our example in this respect. We are not to lord it over people with any power that we have. And we're not to seek our own glory from any positions or influence that we have, but they are used in service. And this is kind of partly countercultural and partly not, because servant leadership is a phrase that you'll hear everywhere, even in secular kind of ideas about leadership and business and administration, all sorts of things. Servant leadership. And everyone wants to seem like they're serving others. That's why we have this whole thing called virtue signaling, because they want to signal the virtue that you are serving and you care about others. So in that respect, doesn't seem particularly countercultural, but when you kind of press into it, it becomes countercultural, because it's like, are you really serving others out of love, or just wanting to seem as if you are? Or, in the kind of the business kind of world and the leadership context, are you simply serving others so you maximize your profits? That's not out of love for people, is it? We're to serve out of an actual deep sense of love for those that we're serving, and obviously ultimately love for Christ and his church. We're to wash people's feet. Not literally, particularly today. It's not really necessary today, but to serve others in ways that are comparable to washing someone's feet. So it's love through service. You see, the washing of the feet would have been very demeaning to Jesus in the kind of eyes of the culture. It would have been kind of slightly awkward, as I've already said. It would have been a humiliating role for Jesus to take on. So are we willing to serve in ways that are demeaning to our sense of our status in society? Are we willing to do things that are slightly awkward? Are we willing to serve in a way that other people would say, that's too much? You've kind of gone too far there, like you're giving too much, you're doing too much, like the love that you're displaying is too extravagant. Because that's the kind of way Jesus is washing these people's feet, and that's why Peter objects. It's too much, Lord. I don't know if I've ever served anyone or done anything to someone that they would say that's too much, you've done too much. That's the amount of love that we should have for one another in the church, but for those outside too. And we're to outdo each other in doing good, aren't we? Because then Jesus says, blessed are those if you do these things. Blessed are those that do these things. Which obviously ties us right back into things like the Beatitudes and things where you think, blessed are those lists of people, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And the whole concept of the Beatitudes is that this is the complete, this is the whole, the right, correct, if you like, person. There's a wholeness to the person who is exhibiting these qualities. And that's exactly the same here. Those that are loving in service, and in service they are loving, there's a wholeness, there's a correctness, there's a rightness about that person. Blessed is the one that does them. That's how it's supposed to be. You know, the more you hold on to the things that you have, and the more you hold on to the dignity that you have, and we have, I should include myself in that, the worse our life is. The more you let go of these things and hold them in an open hand, the more blessed we are by God. And then he kind of transitions into talking about his betrayal again. And the kind of, John makes it clear that the reason he brings up this, Jesus brings up the betrayal several times, is it's kind of apologetically, he wants to mention it so that people will understand who he is. They'll know that Jesus was able to predict what was going to happen, so they'll know that it's he. That's the phrase he uses. They'll know, Jesus says, I was saying this so that you know that I am he. And you're like, okay, well, that's brilliant. The obvious question is, who's he? Like, who is the he that he wants them to know who he is? Well, he's obviously the Messiah. He wants them to know he's the Messiah, the one sent from God. He's been mentioning that time and time again. But in this specific context, I think he wants them to know that he is the he of Psalm 41, from which he quotes. He's quoting from Psalm 41 when he says, talking about the person who's dipped the bread or eaten bread with him will raise his heel against him. That's a direct quote from Psalm 41, which is a psalm in which the psalmist is kind of lamenting and talking a lot about he's being opposed by someone very close to him. He's facing opposition from an intimate friend. He's being betrayed, if you like. That's the context of the psalm. And Jesus says, this applies to me. The psalmist was really talking about me. You see, throughout the whole of the Old Testament, there is a principle at work that wherever God's action is taking place through an individual, that individual will be opposed. When God's work is being done in the world, there will be opposition and there will be betrayal. Think of Cain and Abel. Think of Joseph and his brothers. Or think of David and Saul. There's other examples that we could go to as well. There's a principle at work, the principle of opposition to God's work, and a principle of betrayal. And Jesus is the ultimate kind of fulfillment of that principle. He is God's action in the world. He's about to come and redeem people, and there is opposition. There's betrayal, intimate betrayal. Those that are intimately acquainted with Jesus is going to be one of the ones that betrays him. And in this little section that we just read, verse 20, as you read through it, I don't know if you noticed or not, like it kind of is a little bit jarring. It can seem a little bit out of context. He's talking about betrayal, he's talking about washing his feet, and then all of a sudden he's saying, whoever receives you receives the one who sent you, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me, the Father. So it seems a little bit out of context, but actually, if you think about it in this way, I think it makes sense that Jesus is sending his disciples out to do as he has just demonstrated for them, the serving, the washing of the feet. He's sending them out to do that. And when they go out to do that, when they go out to serve, when they go out to love others, they're going to meet this same opposition principle. They're going to be opposed. They're going to be rejected and they're going to be betrayed, ultimately, potentially. That's going to happen. If you're going to serve God, those things are going to happen. And when they go, so they're going to face opposition, but some will accept them. And the acceptance of them really links back to the acceptance of Christ, which then really links back to the acceptance of the Father. That's Jesus' point there. When the disciples go out and they love and they serve, and they are received, then that is a sign that that those who are doing the receiving are receiving also Christ and the Father who sent him. Now, let's read the final little bit for this morning. Verse 21 down to verse 30. After saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit and testified, "Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he spoke. One of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, was reclining at table and at Jesus' side. So Simon Peter mentioned to him and asked Jesus of whom he was speaking. So the disciple leaning back against Jesus said to him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it." So when he dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Then after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him, and Jesus said to him, "What you're going to do, do quickly." Now no one at the table knew why he said this to him. Some thought that because Judas had the money bag, Jesus was telling him, "Buy what we need for the feast," or that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the morsel of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. Okay. Just a couple of comments on this as we come up to time. So firstly, Jesus was troubled in his spirit. It's clear here that Jesus is he's not a robot. He's fully man. Okay, his divinity has not covered up his manhood here. This is not docetic text here. Docetism, the heresy of the early church that kind of said that Jesus is God, but not really fully human. No, he's fully human, and he's troubled by the fact that he's about to be betrayed. It's emotionally affecting him, if you like. And he knows who it is, and he's sitting there at the table eating with this person. It's a deep personal sense of betrayal that Jesus kind of experiences here. So something that we can relate to as we follow Christ, and we will experience this probably, potentially most of us will at some point experience betrayal. Jesus has gone through that experience and he knows it much to a greater extent than we do. This is kind of one of the kind of great elements of the Easter story, if you like, the life of Christ. One of the most kind of affecting parts is that one of his closest friends is the ones the ones that betrays him. It's the one who betrays him, which makes me think of Lamentations. Definitely, if you haven't already, as part of kind of this Easter and Holy Week sort of time of the year, go and read Lamentations and read it as if it was Jesus speaking rather than Jeremiah. Jeremiah is kind of talking about the fall of Jerusalem and all the terrible things that have happened to Israel. But if you read it through the eyes of Christ, you see how it's really fulfilled in Jesus. And at one point in verse 12 of chapter 1, he says, "Was there ever sorrow like my sorrow?" Which I think is just apt. Was there ever sorrow like Christ's sorrow here, to be betrayed in such a brutal way? The poet, the metaphysical poet from the 17th century, George Herbert, kind of picks up on that concept and has a great poem called The Crucifixion, which continually asks the question, was there ever grief like mine? Was there ever grief like mine? And 2 stanzas of that poem relate to Judas. He says, "Mine own apostle, whom the bag did bear, though he had all I had, did not forbear to sell me also, and to put me there. Was ever grief like mine? For 30 pence he did my death devise, who at 300 did the ointment prize. Not half so sweet as my sweet sacrifice was ever grief like mine." I commend that poem to you. You should go and read that this afternoon. Was ever grief like Christ's? Was anyone ever betrayed in such a terrible way? But the disciples are confused, aren't they? This is kind of John's point in this little passage as well. Jesus knows exactly what's going on, but the disciples really don't know what's going on. They're very much confused. Even after one of them, John, the disciple who Jesus loved, has kind of asked Jesus, who's going to betray you? And he says, it's this guy who I'm going to give the piece of bread, again referencing back to Psalm 41, dips the bread, gives it to him. Even then, they're still confused when he goes out. Jesus says, what you're about to do, go out and do it. And they're like, what's he going to buy some stuff? They can't put the pieces together. He literally just said, this guy's going to betray me. But they're confused. Jesus is not confused. Jesus is 100% clear in his mind what is going to happen. And he takes it on willingly. And then again, we have the reference to Satan coming into Judas. And here we shall pause to say that this is kind of telling us that this is a human and demonic spiritual opposition. This human and spiritual opposition that Jesus is now being faced with. He's betrayed by rebellious humanity, but it's at the instigation of rebellious angelic forces. So this is a cosmic battle, if you like, John is setting up. That Jesus is about to go to the final showdown. He's about to defeat the devil himself, if you like. Satan has come into Judas. And that's the thing. Satan thinks this is a good idea, right? He thinks the Son of Man's come. If I kill him, then what of God's great plan? But this is the great irony and why it's such a sort of good story, as well as the kind of glorious truth of it being true. But just from a narrative perspective, it's a brilliant story because the devil thinks he's got the upper hand. He's entered into one of Jesus' closest friends. They're going to betray him. Jesus is going to die. But that is the very thing that destroys the work of the devil, isn't it? Which is just a wonderful truth there. Jesus destroys the devil through the devil's own kind of deceitful plans, if you like. And now once Judas has left, he's gone out into the night, now the upper room discourse can begin, and that's what we'll get into over the next few weeks. Jesus talks very at length theologically to the ones that he has said are clean. So we kind of have like a picture of the church here. Inside the upper room, you can picture it, it's kind of warm, it's light, there's life there, there's feasting, there's friendship, there's community, there's love between one another, there's service to one another. And Jesus is teaching them, revealing more of himself, but outside it's night. Judas has gone out into the night, and the night is dark. And darkness and night in John is sin. It's evil, it's where bad things happen, and that's where Judas has gone to enact his evil plans and schemes, if you like, by betraying Jesus. So the message for us is very simple, isn't it? Let us pray that we stay in the light and in the life and in the church, and we experience and enjoy the blessings of the love that Jesus has displayed for us, and then use that in service to one another rather than going out into the night and sin and darkness like Judas did. Let me pray, and then there's people wanting to come in, so let's pray.